Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 12 of the regular season for the San Jose Sharks. They took on the Colorado Avalanche and won by a score of 3-2 in overtime. And for the first time this season, the Sharks were actually able to string back-to-back wins together, which is already quite nice to see considering the poor start that the Sharks had to this season, but it is made even more impressive by the circumstances at which these wins came about. You go back a couple of days ago, the Sharks took on a New Jersey Devils team who at the time was the top team in the NHL standings, leading in terms of points, and the Sharks were able to get their first regulation victory of the season with that 5-2 win. And now, fast forward a couple of days, today's matchup, afternoon game against Colorado, it was the Avalanche who found themselves right at the top of the NHL standings. And so the Sharks, in back-to-back games, managed to knock off who you could technically consider to be the best teams in the entire NHL. This one did require overtime, but 2 points all the same. And so for a Sharks team that started the year off 6 straight losses, if you had told me a couple of weeks ago that San Jose would be able to knock off both Colorado and New Jersey in back-to-back games, I would have never believed you, and yet here we are. And in fact, in the last 6 games that the Sharks have played, they now have a winning record of 4-2. So quite the turnaround for this team. Now, this game starts off kind of like with the New Jersey one. It is not a dominant performance here for the San Jose Sharks, but the thing is that when you go up against the best teams in the NHL, it is very difficult to really take it to them for a full 60 minutes. Even the other best teams in the NHL are incapable of actually doing that. For instance, if you watch the game yesterday when Colorado took on the Golden Knights, those are 2 powerhouse opponents. They go toe-to-toe, they go back and forth in those games, and that's kind of what happened here tonight. At first, it was the Avalanche who had the majority of the chances. In fact, they scored just 30 seconds into this game coming from Martin Necas, and there was a little bit of a worry that this game early on could get out of hand, since I believe the Avalanche had the first 9 or 10 shots of the game. And if you go back, I believe, to the previous matchup that these two teams played, that was last year, but it was a game in which Cale Makar put up 6 points and McKinnon put up 5 points en route to a 7-2 victory for Colorado. The Sharks have not had much success against this team as of late, but they are able to respond in the second half of this first period. They actually take control of this game, and they get a goal from Macklin Celebrini, who continues his point streak, and it is 1-1 at the end of 20 minutes. Early on in the second period, the Sharks are actually able to keep up that momentum, and they even score to take the lead here with a goal from Philip Kurashev, who stays hot, and now it is 2-1 San Jose. However, a big momentum-shifting moment occurs as the Avalanche score their goal to tie this one up at 2, and you'll notice here McKinnon, I have written AWD next to his name, and this is because this is what the NHL considers this goal to be. It was an awarded goal because it was not actually scored. What ended up happening here is that McKinnon makes a move, gets this puck into the crease area, and as he's about to put it in, Jeff Skinner kind of trips over himself and runs directly into the net, knocking it off its moorings, and so this one technically would not have counted because obviously the net is off. But since the Sharks knocked it off themselves and the puck would have gone in normally, the NHL decides to give him the goal all the same. A pretty unique situation, but a call that I think was correct. I would have been extremely frustrated if the shoe were on the other foot and the Sharks had a goal called off for that exact situation, so I can't be too mad about it. However, what this ended up doing was kind of shaking the confidence of the San Jose Sharks for whatever reason. You know, they have been a lot more mentally strong as of late, but it faltered a little bit there. And for the rest of the second period, San Jose was just completely crushed in their own zone. They were quite fortunate to not have given up another goal, and so it was a 2-2 game heading into the third period. Now, last game against the New Jersey Devils, the Sharks had a significant lead in the third period, and so they kind of shut it down, turtled very heavily, and didn't even manage to register a single shot on goal. However, here tonight in a tie game, you do have to play well, and we can recall so many times last season when the Sharks would go up against a team, and especially a really good team, in a tie game in the third period, and they would always end up losing those thirds. They'd give up a goal, a couple of goals, and then end up losing that one. But here tonight, the Sharks played it rather evenly. This was a third period that I wouldn't say any team actually had a big advantage in, and so the third period passes with not a goal happening either way, and we head to overtime. Now, the last couple of overtimes that the Sharks have played, they've managed to win with a similar strategy. Start off with Wenberg and Eklund, hope that they can manage to survive against the first wave of attack from the opponents, and then get Celebrini and Smith on and watch them end the game. It worked against the Rangers, and it worked against the Minnesota Wild. The problem was, of course, is that the reason it worked against those teams was not necessarily because of, elite play from Wenberg and Eklund, more so because against the Rangers, Shesterkin misplays the puck and gives it right back to the Sharks, and then against the Wild, San Jose manages to survive an almost 4-minute shift in their own zone. But here tonight, it does go a good bit better. It is actually relatively evenly played between Wenberg and Eklund, and then I believe it was McKinnon and Natchez on the other side for the Avalanche, but then eventually it transitions into being Celebrini and Smith on the ice, and this time they are not actually able to end the game, and so we finally see a third shift from the Sharks in the overtime, and coming out it is Eklund and Wenberg yet again, but they are joined by Philip Kurashev, so no defenseman on this situation. Shows a tremendous amount of trust from Ryan Warsofsky into his second line that has been playing very good hockey as of late, and it is indeed Kurashev who ends up ending this game with the overtime game winner and giving the Sharks the victory here tonight. So great game for the San Jose Sharks. They played a very solid kind of head-to-head matchup here against Colorado. Could you argue that maybe they were the slightly worse team in totality? Perhaps, but they claimed the victory, and that's what matters. Moving on to the players to talk about. So we have our 12 forwards here. Not a surprise what ends up happening as Ryan Reeves is injured for tonight's game. I'm not entirely sure how long-term that's going to be, but now San Jose, they only have 12 forwards up here in the NHL, and so unless they wanted to go an 11-7 setup, which they theoretically could have gone for, these are the 12 forwards that we got. Top line, it is Toffoli, Celebrini, and Will Smith. And I got to talk about Macklin Celebrini, who I thought had a bit of a roller coaster of a game. There were some extreme positives here tonight, which I definitely want to focus on. Going back to that first period, for instance, this goal, of course, stands out very heavily, and it is going to be the thing that is talked about quite significantly because this was a fantastic shot, and it keeps up his point streak, and now he's got like 18 points on the season. It's all well and good there, but there are other standout moments here for Celebrini tonight that really kind of separate him from not just being a great player who's able to put up points and everything like that, but from being like a kind of elite game-changing type of player. And the moment I want to highlight was on a particular shift as he's getting to the end of it, and maybe this was a little bit of a risky play for sure, as both of his line mates, they head off for a change. Smith goes off, Toffoli goes off, but Celebrini, he has this puck at the blue line outside in the neutral zone, and he dumps the puck in, and you're thinking, okay, he's going to head off, but instead, he goes in for the forecheck, he chases down the Colorado Avalanche defenseman, and not only does he win the battle against that one player, but two other Avs players join in. It is a 1-against-3 situation here for Celebrini, and he emerges with the puck, he emerges with possession, he gets it back to his teammates, and it ends up with an offensive zone shift for the San Jose Sharks. That is the type of effort and just presence that Macklin Celebrini can actually bring to this team on a consistent basis. That is why he is not only the best player on this line, not only the best player on this team, but one of the best players, at least he is becoming this, in the entire NHL. Just absolutely incredible season thus far after a relatively slow start for him in the first few games. Now, I did mention that this was a roller coaster type of performance because while he did have a very good start and was really trying to lead this line, it kind of shifted a little bit after that McKinnon goal that made it 2-2. I had mentioned that San Jose kind of fell off a little bit, and Celebrini was definitely a part of that. We started to see a lot of the cracks that we had seen, a lot of the weaknesses that we had seen from him last season. The major thing being his puck management. He started to go for a lot more of these kind of low percentage passes in the second half of the second period and the early parts of this third period, and it led to a good 3 or 4 giveaways. It did not necessarily burn the San Jose Sharks, as after that McKinnon goal, they didn't let in another one for the rest of the game, but it was something that definitely needed to be cleaned up, and it seemed as though Celebrini recognized that as the game continued onwards, because in the final few minutes of the third period, I thought he had some really good shifts, but it was a brief return to maybe some of the wrong plays that we were seeing from him last season and not what we have been seeing from him as of late. But still, I would still say a positive outing for Celebrini because he's just that good in other areas this game. When it comes to his two line mates, Toffoli and Will Smith, I actually wasn't a huge fan of Will Smith's game here tonight. I do think in the latter half of the third period, he did put together a couple of good shifts, so a strong end to the game, but it felt as though he was kind of a step behind for large portions of this game, not really managing to accomplish much. And then the usual strengths that he has, which is basically when he gets the puck, he can make a really nice pass. That was also a little bit off here tonight. So I wasn't hugely impressed with Smith's game. When it comes to Tyler Toffoli, he obviously had that fantastic pass to Celebrini on that one goal in the first period. That was very nice to see. Otherwise, I didn't really think it was all that impressive of an outing for Tyler Toffoli. It really kind of felt as though Celebrini was the main driving player on this line, and his two line mates not quite able to keep up with him. When it comes to the Sharks' second line here, of course, we have Eklund, Wenberg, and Kurashev. They have been dominant in each of these last couple of games, and I really want to highlight this line because I thought that this was a good outing, and it might not look that way in terms of maybe some of the more advanced stats, but the big thing was that you really noticed here tonight is that as the Sharks were the home team, the Sharks had the last change in this game, and they hard matched this trio against the Nathan MacKinnon line on the Avalanche side. Whenever MacKinnon, Necas, and Lehkonen were on the ice, 90% of the time they were facing off against Eklund, Wenberg, and Kurashev, and I thought this second line for the Sharks did a pretty good job of managing to shut them down. Now, you might be looking at the scoreboard here and say, well, Necas and MacKinnon both scored goals. How good of a job could they have done? Well, first of all, the MacKinnon one was not actually this line. This was one of the few times that they were not on the ice for it. And then the Necas one, yes, they were, but this was in the first 30 seconds, maybe a little bit of a slow start for them, but they really brought it back as it went on. And while obviously MacKinnon and Necas are always going to find opportunities to get chances, that's why MacKinnon is, in my opinion, the second best player in the entire NHL, and Necas is certainly no slouch himself. I think they did a pretty good job of being able to shut them down throughout. Now, when it came to the offensive side of things, I thought they had a few really good shifts in the first period, not so much as this game wore on, but still commendations to all three of these players who I thought came up with some big defensive moments at multiple different times in this game. I also definitely want to highlight Philipp Kurashev, who has been spectacular as of late. I mentioned that game a couple of nights ago against the Los Angeles Kings was his best of the season, but now he's got some very real competition for that because he was very good against the New Jersey Devils 2 nights ago, and he was once again very solid here in this game against Colorado, not only scoring that 2-1 goal, but the overtime game winner as well. So he has been playing his best hockey as a San Jose Shark. And what is quite interesting about this is that when the Sharks originally acquired Philipp Kurashev, the idea perhaps was to have him play with one of, if not both, Celebrini and Smith. And that is indeed how the Sharks actually began this season. Their first few games, we saw in the preseason that Kurashev was playing with those two players. And the idea behind that was because Kurashev had had all of his success with the Chicago Blackhawks previously in his career, playing on a line with Connor Bedard. And so the idea was you put him with a really good player, and that's how Kurashev can thrive. But because that didn't work out earlier on, he had to fall back down the lineup. Now he finds himself with Eklund and Wenberg. Eklund is obviously no slouch himself. He's a fantastic player in his own right, but more maybe sort of like a high-end second liner. And then Wenberg is kind of more of like a third line, maybe middle six center to be nice about it. And yet Kurashev, despite that, is still able to make a big impact with this second line. And obviously, it is a small sample size of just 3 games, but very promising performances from him at this moment. When it comes to the Sharks' third line here, we have Graf, Misa, and Skinner. Misa returning to the lineup here tonight. And before I get into his performance, I just want to mention that whatever I'm about to say does not change my perspective on what should occur with Michael Misa here this season. I still feel as though he should be a shoo-in to maintain this spot in the NHL for the rest of this season. To me, there is absolutely no reason to send him back to the junior leagues. He has been playing quite well as of late. However, here tonight, this was definitely one of his most rough outings of the season, probably at that same level to what we saw in his first career game, which was against the Carolina Hurricanes. Misa just didn't quite manage to make much of an impact here tonight at all. I don't think he was like terribly bad or anything like that. It's not as though he had like dozens of giveaways and just led directly to 2 or 3 goals against here for the Colorado Avalanche, but it was just an extremely low impact type of game. You know, I've compared him previously to like the situation with Will Smith last year, and I've mentioned that he has looked a lot more NHL ready. Well, this one was definitely a kind of October Will Smith type of game where just couldn't quite get on the map here for this one. Now, that's not fully true, because you did notice him a couple of times. He had a great chance on a sort of odd man rush type of situation in the first period where he gets robbed by Mackenzie Blackwood. And then there was a good 2-on-1 later on in the game where he decides to not shoot, goes for the pass, and it gets blocked away by an Avalanche player. So he did still manage to find some scoring chances, but besides that, not really able to make much of an impact on this game. So a little bit of a disappointing outing for him. When it comes to his 2 line mates, Colin Graf, also not really hugely impactful here here tonight. This is now 3 games in a row where I feel as though Colin Graf, defensively, it still holds up to an extent, but we had been seeing those flashes of offensive plays prior to that, like back on that 4-game road trip, and that has slowed down, which is a little bit disappointing. And then when it comes to the final line mate here, we have Jeff Skinner. I thought Skinner had a really strong start to this game. Like his first couple of shifts, he was really making things happen, and I thought that this was going to be a big rebound game for Jeff Skinner, who has also been quite quiet as of late, but then that kind of fell off. The only thing big that happened here for Jeff Skinner in this one was the amount of just like hits and like high sticks and things he ended up taking. I mean, he ran into the net, as I mentioned, on the McKinnon goal. He takes a high stick from Landeskog. There were a couple of other things. So he took a few punches, a few kicks, not actually, but like metaphorically, and he got back up each time. But in the end, when it came to this game, I didn't think he was like necessarily hugely important. And then when it comes to the Sharks' fourth line, no Ryan Reeves here tonight, again, due to injury. So it is Giles being joined by Goodrow and Dellandrea. This fourth line, I'll highlight Dellandrea because he had that fantastic pass to Philip Kurashev on that first goal of his. Really, really nice play from Dellandrea, so that's important to point out. When it came to the actual fourth line in general, nothing really doing here much. I thought Giles was okay-ish, but still a little bit of a work in progress. When it comes to Barclay Goodrow, I thought he was pretty solid on a Sharks penalty kill that managed to actually limit the Avalanche to 0 goals here tonight, although only on a couple of attempts. And then Ty Dellandrea, I mentioned the play that he made, but otherwise not a ton doing. And then when it comes to the Sharks defensively, there are a couple of things to talk about. The first of which, of course, is Sam Dickinson, conspicuously missing from the Sharks lineup here tonight. And the big thing is that I had mentioned after that game on Thursday against the New Jersey Devils that I expected a decision to be made about Sam Dickinson on Friday. And you might be thinking, well, if he wasn't in the lineup here tonight, did he get sent back? Not necessarily. This is a set of back-to-back games for the San Jose Sharks, so even without this kind of 9-game window question mark situation for Dickinson, there was a possibility he wouldn't have played this game anyway. So I would say that this kind of deadline has now been extended about 24 hours till tomorrow. If he doesn't play tomorrow, that's when I'll start to be a little bit more worried, or actually a lot more worried, about whether or not he'll actually be sticking around in the NHL for the Sharks. I already made my argument in my previous review for why I think he should end up sticking around here in the NHL. We'll see what decision they end up coming with. From what I have seen said by Warsofsky over these last 24 hours, I would say that at the very least he is leaning towards keeping Dickinson in the NHL. I would imagine that's the way the Sharks are going, though that perhaps is a little bit more wishful thinking. But again, we'll see what happens tomorrow. The other storyline here is what ends up happening relatively early on in this game, having to do with this top pairing. So of course, the top pairing is once again Dmitry Orlov and Timothy Liljegren. They have been playing very well together, but with only about 7 minutes of ice time here tonight, Liljegren ends up taking a puck to the face area while sitting on the bench. Just an unfortunate situation. He ends up leaving with an injury, does not return to the game. Obviously, I don't know if this is a short-term or a long-term thing. Has the possibility to maybe have just kind of like stunned him a little bit, needs a little bit of work done, and he can be back pretty soon. But for instance, we also saw last year Vitek Vanacek take a puck to the face area while sitting on the bench, and I believe he was out for a couple of months after that. So there's no telling what exactly could end up happening with Timothy Liljegren. But what we can absolutely say is that this is an unfortunate situation. Liljegren has been playing quite well this season, has filled into this top pairing role. The Sharks have had other defensive injuries this season, some, more hurtful than others, right? Mukhamadullin missing 7 games was obviously not a very good thing, but then the injuries to Klingberg and the ongoing one to Nick Leddy didn't really hurt the Sharks all that much. I mean, San Jose is 4-2 ever since that Nick Leddy injury, so one could make the argument it has helped them. But this Liljegren one definitely does hurt, and the major question that comes from it is who ends up taking this spot on the top pairing. There are a few options. I would say the best is likely Shakir Mukhamadullin. Yes, it's suboptimal because that is 2 left-handed defensemen, but we have seen Mukhamadullin play that right side to relative success. And the fact is that, again, this is the Sharks' best option because other players, not really where you want to be. Mario Ferraro, you don't want him playing the right side on that top pairing. DeHarnay, you definitely don't want in the top pairing. He's fine as that third pairing guy. He's even pretty good in this role, but not quite to be that main player for you. And then Klingberg is someone who I could see the Sharks going with in this position because I know Ryan Warsofsky, for whatever reason, is a big fan of this player, but We've already seen an experiment back at the beginning of the season with Klingberg on the top pairing. That was with Nick Leddy. It was an absolute disaster. Let's not go there again. Let's not have him in that spot. Mukhamadullin is almost certainly the correct choice for this position. When it comes to, Orlov in this game, because Liljegren didn't quite really play much time, I was once again very impressed with Dmitry Orlov here tonight. He just continues to really blow me away with the very quick progression he has made. At first, I wouldn't say he looked like a lost cause or anything like that, but he was really struggling in those first few games. And of course, his preseason was pretty disastrous as well. And so I was thinking that this signing was not actually working out, but he has managed to turn it around. He has been playing a lot better. Here tonight, it continued. His defensive game has been very solid. His offense, it's not like outstanding, but he's managing to put up points, and actually a decent amount of them for sure. And so for Orlov, he has been that number one defenseman that the Sharks have absolutely needed here. It's kind of in like a pseudo role. Is he the guy who would lead you to a Stanley Cup? Obviously not, but he has been doing what the Sharks have asked of him. Now, the one thing that I do want to mention here when it comes to Dmitry Orlov is the Sharks' power play situation, because as we know, back on that 4-game road trip, the Sharks' power play was rolling. They were putting up goals in almost every single one of those games. Goal against the Rangers, goal against the Devils, a couple of goals against the Minnesota Wild, and at that time, the Sharks were the 7th ranked power play in the entire NHL at over 28%. Very, very impressive. However, going back home in the game against the Los Angeles Kings, the Sharks decide to make a switch. They knock Orlov off of that top unit and they bring back John Klingberg, who had, of course, missed the previous 6 games. And since that moment, since that swap, the Sharks are 0-10 on their power play. Now, you can't put all of the fault onto John Klingberg. I'm not saying that if Orlov was in this position, the Sharks would have gone 5 for 10 or anything like that, but it is a classic case of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The Sharks power play was not only working, but it was clicking, it was firing on all cylinders, and I'm very confused as to why Warsofsky would harm that chemistry, and I'm very confused as to why the Sharks are not going back to what had success with the 0-10 marker that the Sharks are currently sitting at. Obviously, they have been winning games despite this factor, and so maybe that is the reason why the Sharks aren't feeling as though their power play is letting them down or anything like that. But it does seem as though Orlov is the better player for that top power play position. You can have Klingberg on the second unit if you really want to, but Orlov was doing a good job on that first group with Celebrini, Smith, Toffoli, and Eklund. So that should be something that the Sharks revisit for sure. When it comes to this Sharks second pairing, while the Orlov-Liljegren one, or at least Orlov himself, played very well, not the case for the second group. First of all, Mario Ferraro, I thought, had a really, really rough night. He kind of picked it up as it went on, but certainly early on in this one, first, second period, there were a lot of mistakes being made. There was one extremely early in this game, just the first couple of minutes after the Sharks had given up this goal. Mario Ferraro gets the puck behind the net. He's on his backhand. It's a tough situation. However, he's got a ton of time to actually be able to, move off of his backhand, go to the forehand, make a play, get this puck out of the zone. But perhaps there's a lack of communication on the ice. Nobody's telling him that he's got that time, because instead of actually just, making that play, he fires a weak backhand off the boards. It's kept in, and it's more pressure for the Avalanche. And considering they had just scored a goal, it was already 1-0, and the Sharks were just looking for something to help them get going the other way. That's the type of mistake that Mario Ferraro, I can't even say that he can't make, because we're so used to him making this type of error. And it's kind of funny when you think about it, because if a younger player, like if a Sam Dickinson were to make a move like that, you would be very critical of it. I'm sure people would say, that shows that he's not fully 100% ready for making it in the NHL, and I'm sure Ryan Warsofsky would have him miss a shift or anything like that. But when it comes to Mario Ferraro, you just kind of shrug your shoulders and you're like, oh, that's Mario Ferraro. He's just going to do that. And I realize he obviously brings other aspects to the game, right? Very committing to putting up hits and putting up blocked shots. But the reason he has to do that so often is because of these types of turnovers in his own zone. So I didn't like Mario Ferraro's game here tonight. When it comes to his defensive partner, John Klingberg, the best thing that I can say about Klingberg is I do think he was slightly better than what we saw out of Ferraro in this game. He was the slightly better player on this defensive pairing, but otherwise there were mistakes being made by John Klingberg. There are still these giveaways. I highlighted so many of them against New Jersey. There weren't as many here tonight against Colorado, but there was one in a really key position that gave a great chance to the Colorado Avalanche. So Klingberg, there are still positives to kind of pick out of his game. aspect of him being a good puck mover and actually being able to kind of skate with the puck and move through the neutral zone has come somewhat as advertised here. Like, that's nice to see, but the defensive game, or the lack thereof, has been pretty disappointing to see. That's maybe not that much of a surprise, but the how bad it has been is more so a bigger issue here for the San Jose Sharks. And so offensively from John Klingberg, like, you like some of that movement, though I will say there's not a ton of high-end offense here, but defensively leaves a ton to be desired, and the reason for why I don't want him getting bumped up to that top pairing. And then finally we have the bottom pairing here with Shakir Mukhamadullin and Vincent Desharnais. So in place of Dickinson, Desharnais steps back in. I thought it was a couple of things. First of all, I thought it was very interesting that Desharnais ends up still getting a pretty small amount of ice time, only about 14 minutes, and this is despite the fact that Liljegren missed a decent chunk of this game. They heavily leaned on the other four defensemen here tonight. One of the reasons for this, perhaps, is that the last time the Sharks had a defenseman injury during a game, that was Nick Leddy, if I'm not mistaken, against the New York Rangers. We saw Desharnais bump up to about 20 minutes that night, and he didn't really look good with this extra time, and so perhaps they know just how much he actually can play on a given night, and that's why they limit his ice time. The other thing to say here about Vincent Desharnais is that I do think he actually played pretty well in this game. There was a bad giveaway early on, kind of like what we saw for Mario Ferraro, and this contributed to the Sharks being hemmed into their own zone so significantly in the first few minutes. But unlike Ferraro, I do think Desharnais cleaned up as it went on, though of course with easier matchups, and so it ended up being not a terrible night for him. And then his defensive partner Shakir Mukhamadullin, I actually was very impressed with Mukhamadullin's performance here tonight. The other night against New Jersey, I thought he was pretty good, a nice little adjustment as he returns back from that injury. He had missed a good amount of time, and I think he took another step forward here. One of the best defensemen on the ice for the San Jose Sharks, probably only behind, actually definitely only behind Dmitry Orlov, because obviously Ferraro and Klingberg were not close. So I definitely liked what we saw from Mukhamadullin, and also credit to him for the stretch pass on the Celebrini goal up to Tyler Toffoli. And then finally we have the Sharks goaltender Yaroslav Askarov. It was on the surface here a very good night for Askarov. He only lets in a couple of goals, and with the amount of shots that he ended up facing, it's going to look very, very good for his stats. But there is one thing that I do want to highlight, which is that there were definitely times here tonight where Askarov, you could still see a little bit of that shakiness in his game. A few times where he eats the puck and then he looks behind him, which is not usually what you want to see out of your goaltender. There was one moment where the puck, he makes the save and it squeaks out from him, stays on the goal line, and the Sharks have to clear it away with like a heroic move. And then of course there was the moment where, this one's like a little bit more forgivable, but it is something to mention, where he goes out to play the puck and he trips over himself, falls down, and then has to make a diving poke check save, because without that the Sharks would have given up that goal and perhaps would have lost this game in regulation. There was still a few minutes tied up, but it's the type of errors that have been plaguing the Sharks back in the beginning of the year. So still a little bit of shakiness there, but what we do see is that if Askarov can play well, the high level of skill and talent is absolutely there. If he can kind of settle in and lock in a little bit more, Askarov has the ability to win some games here for the San Jose Sharks this season. We knew he was capable of it. He just needs to get past this sort of mental block that it seems he currently does have. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action tomorrow. They'll be taking on the Detroit Red Wings there. The Red Wings have actually been a pretty impressive team thus far this season. However, on their California road trip, I believe they've already played against both the Kings and the Ducks, and they've lost both of those games, and so they'll be looking for a little bit of redemption there. And the Sharks, meanwhile, trying to put together a 3-game winning streak, which would be almost unheard of for the San Jose Sharks in recent years. Class dismissed.